Anyways, the Navajo Indians were from present-day Arizona. They were from Mexico. People from Mexico, Francisco Coronado, entered from Mexico, crossed the border into New Mexico and Arizona, and they lived in pueblos. The Anasazis lived in Four Corners, which is in Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, and Arizona. And Mesa Verde was one of the places where the Pueblo and Indians lived in the Southwest. They were dwellers, they were weavers, they had sheep, they were in rodeos, they lassoed. They still do all this. Sometimes they speak Spanish, like fluent Spanish from Mexico, from the border, and they're Mexicans, like Navajo Indians. But then the women are weavers, and they have sheep, they have rugs, they have Anasazi rugs, they live in the sky, they live in Monument Valley, which is also where the Marlboro cowboy is from. Come to where the flavor is, come to Marlboro country. Also, yes, and they ride horses, they lasso in rodeos, the Navajos, they're cattle, which brings me to the Cowboys. The Comanches live in Texas and Oklahoma, and Geronimo during the Spanish-American War. After that, Geronimo is a not fictional, they portray him to be a stereotypical, we all know who he is. Geronimo was a ferocious, after Davy Crockett in San Antonio, the Alamo and battle and all, he died where he died and all this other stuff. So Geronimo was a native, and he was a chief, a hero, leader of the Apaches, and he was also, I'm going to get to his history maybe in a little bit, but Geronimo stands out as the Apaches and Comanches go. And so, the Zuni Indians lived in pueblos in Arizona and Sedona, Red Rocks, and the Grand Canyon. And the Zunis, or as the Daini Indians, and the Hopi Tewa Indians, and they had pottery, and so they had long hair, and they dressed up in deer. They had dances like Dancing Rabbit Creek and others. That was one of their main ritual ceremonies. They wore ceremonial headdresses, and the Gemano Indians were a little bit east, toward Mexico, like El Paso and New Mexico, in Albuquerque. And so they lived in dwellings like in these holes under canyons, like dirt. That's where some of the Zunis and Hopi Tewas lived. And so the Cowboys, so they encountered Comanches. Cowboy is a vaquero, so vaqueros were from the original cowboys from Mexico, even far south and from Latin America, heavily influenced by the original cowboys, the gauchos in Brazil, South America, and Peru, and the Andes, and in places like that. So they were lassoing sheep and cattle brought by Spanish earlier on, by the Spanish bolivars, okay? And they went into the Mexico, and then they crossed the border, vaqueros. And cowboys, we all know the story of the cowboys, who they were. Cowboys lasso, they go to rodeos, today bull riding, they wear all the sponsors, the Monster Energies, the Rockstar Energies, the DeWalt's, the Tyson Foods logos on their shirts, vests, Wrangler, they wear the Wrangler logos, all these logos, Levi's. So cowboys, the stereotypical image of the cowboy, he's muscular, he rides horses, He lassos, he shoots guns. We all know he has mustaches, Stetson hats, taco hats. He is a hero. He is a poet. Poetry. He lived in Texas, Colorado, Oklahoma. He lived in Kansas. He lived in Nebraska. He lassos cattle on the range. We all know. Wyoming on ranches. And, you know, just like, and over in Mongolia, they have something in Tibet, nomads. He still exists. His culture is very much alive today out west. In California, Californios was a cowboy too. And he is much like the Tibetan nomads who ride yaks. He rides a horse. They ride yaks. In Mongolia and China, they have nomads and Qinghai from the Qing dynasty, but that's a whole different on that side of the world category. That comes from Genghis Khan and the Turks and the Mongols and the Ottomans. It's not related, but it sort of is. They both do the same thing. They herd, they round up, they lasso. I was mentioning Florida. Florida, don't let the beaches fool you. Florida, like I said, had cracker cattle but came from Seminoles. They do the same things down there on those ranches as out west. So, Mexico had charros. Charros were cowboys similar to ours. They were from Mexico, but they had serapes. They were caballeros, okay? And so they were Spanish. They were pesos. They had pesos for money, and so cowboys, and also in Mongolia they have carts. They have chuck wagons out west. There's cowboys and chuck wagons. In Mongolia have yaks, and then out west they have longhorns. So they're very much alike in history too. And the Silk Road in Mongolia, off topic, I'm getting. But it's interrelated to Native Americans, has that. And then, just like I mentioned, the Oregon Trail earlier with Lewis and Clark and Meriwether, that was a part of the history. And it came through Lincoln, Nebraska. The Oregon Trailblazers were like the Silk Road, okay, in China, ancient China, and Tibet, Mongolia, and in those places. So yeah, cowboys encountered Indians, but they rarely did. It's a fact. You see in the John Wayne movies, you see in the old westerns like Dances with Wolves, where cowboys, Kevin Costner encounters Indians. Yes, they did. But did it happen? Absolutely. But did it happen very often? Unfortunately, unlike you see in the old westerns like that, they didn't encounter cowboys very often, but they did sometimes. Bill Pickett was an African-American cowboy. He encountered some Comanche Indians in present-day Oklahoma. And so he was a black cowboy, African-American rancher who didn't invent the picket fence as you see on farms and ranches with horses and cows, but I guess he sort of had a little bit to do with it, maybe, like fences. This was like during the Civil War, so cowboys in the Civil War and the Spanish-American War, Mexican-American War came. During the Louisiana Purchase was cowboys too. They were the Louisiana Purchase, and they went up to Pikes Peak too. The Louisiana Purchase did, and present-day Colorado Springs, Colorado, that was a part of it. So Bill Pickett was there too. So the Comanches, the Apaches, the Sioux, yes, they encountered somewhat. They encountered the cowboys. They did. Not often. Like I said, cowboys went from Texas up into Montana. We think of Rawhide like the Blues Brothers when it comes to that, but it's more. And so the California Gold Rush was a part of Western history. So of course, South Dakota and North Dakota didn't have many cowboys. They had some, but it was mostly Sioux Indians, Lakota, and Dakota tribes in that region, into where Mount Rushmore is. So, and then you had Annie Oakley, Little Sure Shot Annie Oakley, and guerrilla warfare took place in the Sioux Territory. Guerrilla, that was one. And then you had Buffalo Bill, of course. He was in Colorado, too. And outside of Denver, present-day Denver, in Golden, Colorado. That was, it's a big history of Indians out west. Of course, Indians hunted. They gathered, they hunted for bison, buffalo, bears, moose, elk, deer, and caribou was more north, but I'll get to the northwest later. Okay, and so Nevada had Indians. They had, Utah had the Utes. Brigham Young was a Mormon pioneer from Utah who encountered the Ute Indians in the Utes. The Ute Indians were a big tribe that were part of the Mormon expedition from Salt Lake City, and they went northward into almost present-day Idaho. And so the Utes had teepees, they lived on plains, they hunted. There were some bison, buffalo there, but then they went into the high mountains, the high peaks, the Rocky Mountain Basin. The Rocky Mountains were from Colorado, still are, and they went into parts of Utah, and Salt Lake was another place where they went. Brigham Young was another pioneer that he encountered the Indians, the Ute Indians there too. The Oregon Trail I'm not sure if it passed through there, but yeah, anyway. The Utes were there. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid may have gone into Utah. He was definitely in Colorado, but he encountered Indians too. The Indians were a big part of the West. In Dodge City, Kansas, Bat Masterson and Doc Holliday raided the outlaw town where Indians came into. Wells Fargo stagecoaches came there. And so the Indians came there and were shot by the outlaws. Outlaws were these men and gunslingers in attire who wore this bankers kind of clothes. Just think of modern Wall Street. This is in the 1800s. Wells Fargo was a bank located in Nebraska. What they did was they robbed trains. There were train robberies. There were bank robberies. There were towns. Just think of and the sheriffs were there too. The old sheriffs. Sheriff John Brown may have been real in that Bob Marley song. That's off topic, but there were sheriffs. Wild Bill Hickok was another one that came to those outlaw ghost towns. They're ghost towns now, but they had saloons. They had doors that slide. They have pianos. Just like think of Yosemite Sam, okay, and Bugs Bunny. Not exactly, but in real life, it was like a wild shootout, right? Like a wild deal. So they had outlaws. Outlaws were these men with guns. Think of Sinister Sam and Bad Bart on Sesame Street. The Muppets, both portrayed by Jim Henson. It's like that in real life, and Yosemite Sam in real life. But there were mean people, meanest town. Mean people west of the Pecos. Bat Masterson was an outlaw who was arrested and put in jail in the town where it is, yeah. And so Indians came, and so what the Western movies write, the outlaws saw these men as bad people, and they did draws. Like sometimes you had square draws, like one outlaw would shoot another. Sometimes you had gunslingers who would be on one end and then the other end, cowboys sort of, and then the outlaw Indians would come in sometimes, and then they'd shoot out, and they'd be on in these towns, and so you go like well, I mean, it was like, I'm just saying a historical fact. They blow smoke all over the place, and sometimes when I said train robberies, you had people like, yeah, you just think of the Lone Ranger, okay, where you had Tonto, okay, that's sort of what it was, and they went on a train and they went, ooh, and then it's true though. They portray it at Tweetsie Railroad in Blowing Rock, even though Blowing Rock has nothing to do with the Wild West. It's a Wild West theme park, okay? The Indians actually went on the train, and so did cowboys, and they raided people sitting there. At Tweetsie Railroad, when you're a kid, you sit on the train, and they come and scalp you. Well, that really happened in old outlaw ghost towns. It did. And so, and at saloons, they would sit there and drink a beer. It's just a true story, too. And then you had entertainment at night where gals would be with boys and they'd dance, square dance, and do hoedowns. It's true. It's not made up. It really happened. So, I'll talk more about the Indians.